It is episode 165. It is Wednesday, June 8th, 2022. We are powered by Alaco Fine Wood Floors. They are family owned and operated for more than 2 decades. Alaco Fine Wood Floors is Nashville and Middle Tennessee's choice for premium quality hardwood floors since 1995. Jimmy Alaco and his army of employees have embodied the approach of taking pride in one's craft and providing superior customer service, growing from a one-man shop to a team of 23 professionals who share the founder's passion for quality craftsmanship and customer satisfaction. If you're interested in contacting them for your hardwood floors, you can find their headquarters at 2505 Winford Avenue in Berry Hill, just a short drive away from the beautiful new Geodis Park, the new home of Nashville SC. Or you can give them a call at 615-356-0303 or look at them at their website, alacofinewoodfloors.com. Alaco Fine Wood Floors, serving Middle Tennessee's hardwood flooring needs since 1995. Will, we are back. I think what we're gonna do. We're gonna finally start consistently putting one out a week here because I don't know if there's gonna be enough to talk about twice a week, but I think we could do it. I think we could do twice a week from here on out.
As I was
Hey,
muted because I didn't want to make the same mistake twice where I joined the broadcast to retweet it and it replayed like 5 seconds after what you actually said. That
hey,
was a beautiful start.
learning
Last
from our
episode.
mistakes here already. Already learning
Yeah.
from our
Hey,
mistakes.
at
I
least the
like it.
train's not going off to start out the live broadcast. I think we were 100%. The train was batting 1,000 on coming through right when we started the broadcast. But yeah, we're going to be getting one out one a week now that we got you back local. You have
Yep.
nowhere that you can make an excuse to go. So we'll be putting them out a little bit more consistently. But yeah, once football season gets closer and inches closer, we're going to be going back to the 2 a week schedule. And then at some points during that football season, I think we're putting out 3 a week. So
Oh, yeah.
we'll have a ton to talk about. But for the next month or two, you're going to be listening to a lot of opinions from me and Billy after this episode, which I know
A lot of
everybody
hot
loves.
takes.
Yeah.
Oh, they love the hot takes. Will football season just brings it out of us, and the closer we get to SEC media days, and I mean after SEC media days, that's when it all starts. It feels like that as the talking season begins. So we will have all of our previews and scheduled previews and all that coming up during SEC media days. But right now, we've got a Vandy baseball season to recap. Will we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about Vanderbilt's Game 7 regional loss to Oregon State and kind of the overall review of the season and give the team a grade and go through all that kind of stuff and ask a few questions. We'll also talk about some football recruiting notes, and the new basketball faces are on campus. It's pretty cool to see that on Twitter the past couple of days. I think they had a media day yesterday, and Noah Shelby, Colin Smith, and Lee Dort they're on campus. So I think for Vandy fans, just seeing them in black and gold is pretty reassuring. So we will talk about all of that. But before we get to all the breaking news, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at door_report and on Instagram at door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. All right, it's now time for breaking news. All right, Will, let's start from up in Corvallis. We are not in Corvallis. We're in Nashville. We did not go to Corvallis, but Vanderbilt
Thank
went up to
goodness.
Corvallis. And, Will, I'll say this: after they lost to San Diego, I didn't really, have many expectations for this team, the rest of the regional. Now they were playing New Mexico State, a beat up New Mexico State team, and then a beat up San Diego team on Saturday, but. They put up almost 40 runs in one day, and then they beat Oregon State 8-1. So it felt like, okay, maybe this team can get out of this regional alive. But here comes the big bad Oregon State in Game 7, the final game of the regional, and they kind of show Vanderbilt who's boss and who's the better team. Now it was a really good game. Will, I know you were live tweeting it. I'd love to see that. But I mean, Will, they showed fight, but in the end, I think we all expected this to happen. There weren't many people that expected Vanderbilt to get out of this regional.
Yeah, once you get knocked into that losers bracket, which if you go back into episode 164, Billy, it's pretty great to listen to our evaluation where we talked about the regional, and then both of us said, but if they're not careful, this San Diego State is more than capable, I said, of eliminating. And then I corrected myself, and I said not of eliminating, but beating, and that ended up actually being a lot more correct than I even anticipated or meant for it to be. But yeah, you saw the flip you'd been talking about, Billy.
Hmm.
And I think it was even flipped in the game that they lost. I think in that final game against Oregon State, losing 7-6, it felt like the old teams. It felt like they had the energy and the belief that no matter,
Hmm.
even when they were down at the end, maybe not in that ninth inning, you felt the tide kind of turn with that home run from Oregon State that I believe put them into the lead there
Yeah.
late in that game. But you felt the energy. The bats obviously came alive. 21 runs against New Mexico State. Yeah, whatever. But that San Diego team shut them down. And granted, they were pitching their stud of their staff at that time, their main weekend
The last two
starter.
innings, that was brutal.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
that
But
was kind of the salt in the wound there. I mean, at that point, you felt like that game was over. I mean, I was watching it with my brothers. They were like, "Why can't we do that?" And I'm like, "Listen, Oregon State can do it. I mean, they have the power to do it, and they did it." So,
they also
I
had
mean,
one less game to play, which makes getting knocked into that losers bracket so
a little bit
brutal.
easier.
Because you
Yeah.
said that they showed who the superior team is, and I don't think I necessarily agree that Oregon State showed that they were superior. I think if Vanderbilt just played them in a 7-game series, I think that thing would go down to 7 games. And I
Hmm.
think that you would probably be put in the same spot with about a 1-run difference there in that game
Yeah.
seven, all hands on deck. So Vanderbilt is up there with a team like Oregon State this season with the talent level of probably the second most likely team still to win a national championship in Oregon State. And Vanderbilt was right there with them, which makes this season all the more confusing and all the more frustrating and all the more making you want to pull your hair out. Just like that's a very unfamiliar feeling. That was
Yeah.
tongue in cheek sarcasm for Vanderbilt fans. And baseball was supposed to be our safe haven. So that has been a little bit frustrating this year that you've seen not only football, not only basketball have their usual issues that cause me to age at 5 times the normal rate of any other sports fan. And baseball, I can take a deep breath. And in Corbin, we trust, I think is what we like to say. And that's awesome to actually be able to say that. And this is the first season that I followed, said those words, and then still at the end of the season, I sat there and said, maybe not. Maybe there were some criticisms that were deserved that we didn't give at the time or throughout the season that we didn't give just because it was Tim Corbin. And if it was any other coach, replace him with any other name that's not the all-time winningest coach at Vanderbilt in that sport, then you're probably going to be sitting there being critical of things like that decision to bunt there earlier in that
Yeah.
Corvallis Regional, which is still one that is a head scratcher to me. I've ran through every scenario, and nothing that I can think of in my head tells you that that bunt with Vaz in the San Diego game was a logical decision. And at the time, I tweeted that and then said, "But I'm just gonna take a step back because Corbin's had a little more success on the baseball diamond." Being a manager and coach than I have, not a manager, I guess, in college. They don't do that the same. But uh, man, there were things like that. There's the hitting coach situation, which I know that you want to get into, and it's been the talk of a lot of Vanderbilt baseball
Hmm.
fans. So there's a lot to get into with this team. There's a lot of talent returning, and you got to keep in mind they dealt with injuries. And
Yes,
that's
they did.
something that I don't think got talked about enough just because you have 5-star freshmen and these all touted freshmen coming in that's a little bit different than you have in basketball or football. Doesn't mean injuries of your expected stud players, including Hiboki, which I'm
Yeah.
probably, that's just
Loboki.
Loboki.
Yeah,
Jesus
there you go.
Christ. All right,
And then
it's late, Billy.
Michael Doolin also was a
Okay.
guy out of the pen that got hurt. And well, I'm with you. I mean, let's face it, this was not one of the better Corbin teams. I've heard this could be one of the worst Corbin teams. Since at least 2010. I mean, I think that could be argued. But the fact that they went toe to toe with Oregon State, the number 3 seed in the country, on a down year, that's not too bad. That's not too bad for a down year. That's like Duke basketball winning or losing in the round of 32. I mean, but at the same time, there are issues. There were issues that kind of reared their ugly head this year, and you got to believe that Tim Corbin and this staff is going to have to reevaluate the way they do things and their methods, their recruiting methods, their evaluation methods, the way they coach their players. Now, I don't pretend to know what all is going on within that.
Before you go in, and I forget to say this, about an hour ago I was going through a thread on this actual thing about transfers and baseball players, and Arya Gerson has a great thread on Twitter. I
Yes, she
think it's like
does.
8 tweets long, so I don't know if
Yep.
you had that written down, but I was afraid
Yeah.
I was going to forget, so I wanted to
No,
plug
she
that in
does.
there. Check her Twitter out, because
Yeah.
she has a long list of not just culture fit reasons, but all sorts of reasons within there.
Yeah, she had a really good thread tweet. I'm going to actually try to pull that up because there were some really good points in it. But a guy that has joined this podcast several times, Rhett Wiseman, actually quote tweeted that thread, and he had some pretty strong things to say about it. I'm going to try to pull this up. But Will, by the way, as we kind of get to that, let's get to our grades. Let's get to the Vanderbilt baseball season grades as I try to find this. I'll start. Will, it took me a while to kind of figure out what I wanted to do here. I was flirting with a C minus. I was toying with the idea of giving this team a C minus. I couldn't give them a C. I gave them a B. I gave them a B minus. And so I went with well, not C minus. I was toying with the idea of anywhere in the C range. I meant to say C plus. Sorry, my not a math major, Will, and it's late. So um, but
We
Will, at the same time, I ended up giving this team a B minus. And here's why. You mentioned it earlier. It's a young team. They were overall a young team. They had older players like Dom Keegan, Tate Colwick, but other than those two guys, they're most of this team was young and inexperienced. Now there was a good chunk of these guys that had played in Omaha and had some good experience, but overall as a whole, this team was a young team. Pitching staff was very young and inexperienced, and not as much depth as we've seen. And the pitching, I think, was the difference in that Oregon State game. Number two, Will, the injury issues. I mean, Sam Leboke, Nick Maldonado was banged up early on. Tate Colwick was dealing with injuries all throughout the season. So that's kind of my second point. The third point, I put them in the B range because of what I said earlier. I mean, they took the number 3 overall seed to the final pitch of Game 7 of the regional. Not too bad for a down year. So, because of the way they fought and finished, I ended up giving a B minus. Like I said, I was so close to putting it in the C range, C plus, C minus. I ended up just barely giving them a B minus. Could have been a C, but that's what I ended up giving them. And I know there's. I'd love to kind of poll Vandy fans. Maybe we'll do that later tonight and kind of see what their grades are. Definitely, probably could have been lower, but I ended up going with a B minus for this year's Vandy team. So that's where I'm at, Will.
Yeah, I really thought you were going to go the other direction when you said you were toying with a C minus. I thought no way that you were going to go up to a B.
I
So
meant to say C plus. I don't know
yeah,
why I
that's
said
pretty, but that's still pretty surprising to me that you evaluated them in the B range. So I was a little bit harsher. So I was sitting, you said you were sitting at a C minus, and that's where you were teetering at. And I thought you were going to say the exact same thing
D.
that I had, which was I was actually teetering in the D range. So I had them initially, if the season ended, they lost to San Diego, they beat New Mexico State, and then they lose again in that next game versus taking Oregon State to Game 7 of the Corvallis Regional,
Hmm.
then I would have had them down at a D level.
Right.
I gave them a C minus, and I don't think that there's any way to put them above that. I think if anything, that's pretty lenient. And you gotta hear me out on my reasoning here,
Here we
okay?
go.
Because all the reasons that you gave were correct. The young team, the injuries, we've given those precursors and caveats. When we evaluated the football season and when we evaluated the basketball season, the number one thing we said is you grade based on the expectations going into the season. You can't grade based on where they ended up, because if basketball would have ended up this season in the round of 32, they would have gotten an
Ooh.
A
Oh
or an
yeah.
A plus. But that's very, very different. And you even bumped them up to a B, saying they took them
Yeah.
to that Game 7. But the expectations going into the year are you make it to Omaha. And that was the expectation this season. The gambling odds played that out prior to the season. And this was the first losing season for Tim Corbin. We've said this stat many a time in the SEC since 2020 or 2009. And then the stat that I like is since that 2009 season, with that losing SEC record, they have only had a season that has ended this quickly. So being eliminated in the regional
Hmm.
2 times. Can you name those years, Billy? I've got a trivia question live for you.
Okay.
Can
This is a good.
anyone out there name those years? Or can you name those years, Billy?
I don't know if I can name the year, but I can name the team that beat them out. One of them was NC State. I want to say it was 20. Was it 2012? 2012 NC State, was that one of them?
That's one of them is
Okay. Okay.
2012. I don't have the opponents written down, but I have the
Okay.
years
Okay.
written down.
Okay.
2012.
2012. There's another one, right?
Yep, there's one other.
Okay. Can you give me a hint? Is it more? Is it later than
It's
that than
I've
2012
given you
or?
enough of a hint, Billy. It's 2010 through 2021.
Oh, okay.
I
2010
can't
through
give you too many more
2021.
hints. Or
Okay. Okay. 2010 through 2021.
since the 2009
Oh,
season, there have only been
2016. 2016.
yep
Yeah.
2012 and 2016. So those are
Yeah.
it's only happened twice. They've at
Yeah.
least made it to a super regional
And
in every other
2016.
season outside
20,
of obviously the COVID year. But
2016 with the Donnie Everett year. I mean, that's
that was a
but they
different year. But
that was a down year though. Overall, that was a
yes,
down year. But that's incredible. I mean, that really is. That's insane to think about. Because of the standard that Corbin and this coaching staff has set for fans. And this was it was a weird season. It was a weird season because of that.
and
Now,
exactly the other part of why the C minus. Sorry, I'm gonna forget my
here we go.
points. You,
Here we
you
go.
make me forget what I have written down to say. But but for the C minus, the other reason is exactly the reason that you gave. That you said you were teetering on a C minus and bumped them up, which is this team did take the second most favored team to end up winning the NCAA baseball championship this year
Yeah.
2-1
Yeah.
run to the
Yeah.
very end. So with that amount of talent, you're saying that this should have been the first team since 2009 to have a losing record in the SEC. All of their stats from last season, the guys that returned outside of three guys, I think Enrique Bradfield, Spencer Jones, and maybe Dom Keegan. By the end of the year, Braden has a better graphic put out on
He
his Twitter
he's
that we
always got
tweeted
them
out.
ready to roll.
Braden McPherson, give him a follow. A
Yep.
little shout out there for him.
Yep.
But the hitting, it just made no sense. The pitching, if it was just based on that, obviously we didn't get into the Oregon State game, but Riley just struggled. The game was over in
Yeah.
the 1.2 innings that he pitched and the 5 outs that he was able to gain. He gave up 5 earned runs, gave
Yeah.
up
What
six
did you
hits.
think about Corbin keeping him in the game? He kept him in.
Terror. I don't know what.
He kept him in the game in the fourth inning with the bases loaded and 2 outs, and I think he gave up 2 runs there. And then you had Grayson Moore, a guy out of the pen who was struggling, kept him in, and then Oregon State took the lead 7-6. So there's some things like that throughout this season too, Will. Where I'm not saying Corbin. I think there was a different Corbin we saw this year. There was a little bit of a different
Was there
coaching
something
style.
going on with Little? Why he was taken out of the game? I know he'd given up a lot of contact, and he was about to go through the lineup again. I know all of that, but he had only
I
given
was
up two
surprised.
hits,
I was surprised.
and the only earned run he gave up the entire 3 innings he pitched was against the opening batter,
I
and
would love I would
that
love to
doesn't make
ask.
any sense to me.
Yeah, I would love to ask the coaching staff or kind of be a fly on the wall of their discussions there and say, hey, he pitched 3 innings, almost four. What happened there? I
And
mean,
then
he was
obviously
rolling.
after he was getting, struggling, they were willing to stick with Riley past where fans would probably want to see them stick
Hmm.
with him at that point. I know there was just the entire fan base was just urging him
Yeah,
to take out, at least on Twitter, was just urging
yeah,
Corbin to
yeah.
take to
And
go to
then
the mound and call to
you
the
know,
bullpen. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, and then they take him out, and more, he gives up a bomb. So I think the bottom line with a lot of this team was there wasn't as much pitching depth as they've had in the past. I mean, the pitching depth, Oregon State. I mean, it tells you that in Game 7 of the regional, they brought in their ace who was ready to go and ready to pitch in that moment, the last 2 innings, and he put the game on ice. So I think that was a big difference with this team this year. Will the pitching depth, and I mean also the hitting. It was overall. You didn't see the same type of aggressiveness in empty counts, counts, where they take a strike, they take another strike, and then all of a sudden they're down in the count.
I would
So
just sum it up in one word with inconsistency. Because at times this team looked like a national championship level team, and they had the
mhm,
talent to make a run at the national championship, and they never put it together for more than a week or two, or maybe three in that stretch that they had, winning 4 or 5 series at one point in the season. They never put it together for longer than that, and then they would go in the wave and the ebb and the flow. Derek Mason,
cycles goes in
cycles,
cycles.
baby. But you're not supposed to
Um,
have those throughout a baseball season. And so that's the frustrating part is Corbin teams in the past have been known to never waver, be very steady. You always felt coming off a loss or even a win,
it
you
wasn't
almost
going
to
to
a fault
snowball.
felt like that nothing would snowball that
Yeah.
there was no snowball, that it was an individualized game, and it felt like there was a lot of momentum carrying over from game to game, which can be a good thing when you're riding high, cough, cough, Tennessee. But it's a really bad thing when you are a purely momentum based team and that is your culture. That's great. When things are cooking and things are going great, then it's going to be fantastic. But when things are on the downward slope, it tends to snowball a lot quicker. That snowball picks up steam a lot quicker down the hill than it does up the hill. So that's what
Well,
you saw from this team throughout the whole season. Is the moment that one bad thing was happening, the energy in the dugout dropped, everything dropped. But then the moment that a couple hits were strung together and a couple home runs and they would take a lead, you saw guys jumping over the fence on the bullpen and having to be
mhm.
warned by the umpire with energy. So you need to see that regardless. We just didn't see that throughout this year. So hopefully going into next year with a lot of guys returning, coming off injuries, and we'll get into that. But I don't really have a ton on returning guys. I'm sure there's going to be a lot up in there. There always is with
Yeah.
whether guys are going to be going pro or coming in and everything like that.
It'll also be interesting, Will, to see if Corbin dips his toes at all into the transfer portal. Because with the lay of the land in college baseball, not just college baseball, but college sports as a whole, it feels like as a coach you're going to have to. You're going to have to you're going to have to pay the piper there because I mean everybody else is doing it and you're going to have to keep up somehow. But Will, I found Aria Gerson's thread. It's three little tweets here. I'm going to read them off and get your reaction to them. Number one, she said, well, she asked the question at first. She said, why does Vanderbilt not take many transfers? There are, a few reasons. She said, number one, Corbin is all about culture and buy-in. It's easier to tell if someone has that as a high school recruit and easier to develop the attention to detail he requires as it's a different style from many other college coaches. So culture and buy-in. I'm with her on that. I agree with her on that. Number two,
Well, you're
do you agree
dealing
there?
with yeah. I was changing it over to ABC. Yeah, I heard that. I was paying attention just because I'm not looking at you, Billy. I'm
Trying to
listening.
keep you on your toes, Will.
Yeah,
Come on.
but I agree with that. And basically, what that first tweet says is fine. But what you were talking about is Corbin's culture is good to deal with kids, but it does not translate when you're dealing with men. And that's the difference when you're bringing in a 21-year-old, 22-year-old is he's a lot more set in what he's going to
And he wants to
tolerate
play.
and the amount of bullshit he's going to put up with. And for lack of a better word, the buy-in to a great culture is a lot of that, is a lot of BS, a lot of buying into stuff that doesn't matter, because in the end, just focusing on these goals and things to achieve that don't matter will get you where you want to go. And that's all that it is when Corbin is doing things like earning your Vanderbilt gear and they go out there and do all of that. That's great when you're building that culture from day one, that stuff matters. But when you're bringing in dudes from Rutgers and from Oregon or wherever the hell they're coming from, they probably don't have that same type of goal oriented culture and micro goal culture that Vanderbilt has, which I've never been in the locker room. Rhett would be the better guy for you to ask that question
Hmm.
to as to exactly what they do. But I would imagine it's similar to what I've seen in different coaching styles, and obviously not the level of Vanderbilt. But you have some coaches that are just focused on just the grind day to day. And then you have some coaches that are focused on the grind day to day that have individual goals to incentivize guys to look forward to that. And that's what Corbin has done such a good job of is and Nick Saban, all the great coaches that have
Hmm.
done it so consistently and built these prestigious dynasties in college athletics, is you bring in these guys that know that they are destined for the NFL or the MLB or the NBA at 18 years old, and you make them earn things and want to earn things that no one on the outside cares about. When everyone on the outside is just constantly giving them this ego boost, is you go in that locker room and the goal set is completely different than what everyone else on the outside is looking for, and the hierarchy is different. And so that is the issue when you bring in transfers, is you don't have any of that. And if that's what he's built it on, then I think it's going to be a pretty interesting process to see how he incorporates that on top of all the other issues that you face at
Yeah.
Vanderbilt, academic eligibility wise.
Yeah, you just mentioned that. That was her number 2 point, Will. She said, this is an issue for many similar caliber schools. At Vanderbilt, it's difficult for transfers to get admitted academically. Plus, even if they get in, sometimes they lose so many credits, they don't qualify. It's not worth it for those guys. So that's a great point by our, and we know that, Will. We've known that fact. We've seen it
That's
in
every
football.
sport.
Yeah, we've seen it in basketball. I don't think that's anything new or anything surprising. But this one, number three, hit me, Will. She said roster limits mean that in order to take transfers, you have to have spots available. Vanderbilt was over the limit this year. Plus, thus 6 people redshirted. In order to take transfers, many coaches run people off. Vanderbilt doesn't like to do that because of the degree. And when that is another thing. I think we Clark Lee would like to have that developed. I don't know if he's developed that yet. Obviously not. He's only in year two. Stackhouse, I think, is a little bit different in that. You've seen him take transfers, so Will, I think this might be a deeper issue with academic eligibility and financial aid availability now for baseball. Is that changing? And in college baseball, I think it is. I think the scholarship availability is going to be increased from 11.7 very soon. And so that advantage may no longer be there for Vanderbilt in the coming years. It's that's another thing to watch with this. So I agree with most of what you said, Will. There are, I think, smaller tidbits that I might disagree with. But you want to get to Rhett here? Did you see what Rhett tweeted?
No, I did not. But the
Okay.
one thing I want to say on
Yeah.
that is what I've been wanting to say on the whole transfer thing is the part that you hit on, which is the major thing. And I don't even think it's as simple as like you're laying out the tertiary problems to it, to the academic issue, which is losing credits and eligibility. That's specific scenarios you can probably adjust if Vanderbilt was really willing to do it. The main issue is what you said right there, 11.7 scholarships, right? Do you know how damn expensive grad school is at Vanderbilt?
Not cheap.
I mean, you think undergrad's
Not cheap.
expensive. My God, we got to look at it. It's usually typically double whatever undergrad is, and their undergrad tuition is $40,000-$50,000 a year at least right now.
Yeah.
So that
I was looking into
that's
it,
the
Will.
part is other schools you can transfer into, and their grad school they can find some way in max you're going to be paying out of pocket maybe 8-10K if any of these guys
If
really
that.
pay too much out of pocket. But at Vandy it's going to be really hard to get around that as a private institution on
Hmm.
top of the rigors that are required to go to grad school at Vanderbilt and the academic issues you run into. You have the money problem that you don't have that hold up in basketball or in baseball or in football. Sorry, a
Yeah.
little scatterbrain, but basketball and football, you go to Vanderbilt and transfer in as a grad, you're getting handed a free grad school, and that's a selling point. That's not the case at
Yeah.
Vanderbilt, and
Yeah.
that's not just grads. Obviously, this is transfers in as normal as undergraduates, but same idea. You're not being handed a ticket to a free degree at Vanderbilt. That's not how it works. Now, a lot of them can get academic aid, but here's the kicker. And the main thing is I worked as a graduate assistant in the bursar office of Tennessee Tech University. So I dealt with all
Hmm.
the student accounts and everything. The main thing is when you transfer into a school, and this only applies to baseball, but and not football or basketball, because obviously they get full scholarships. But
Yeah.
when you transfer in, you are not eligible for the same type of grants and aid that you are eligible for as an incoming freshman straight out of high school. You're just not. You're not eligible for the same types of loans. You're not eligible for the same types of everything. So
Yeah.
that's the other main issue is you're not getting the financial aid, which is how Vanderbilt or Vanderbilt oppositions and opponents will say they have an advantage is they have more scholarships because they're a private university and can give out private aid as they need to. But the flip side of that is exactly what I'm saying. Is it's more expensive. So when guys you're not going to be able to hit up the transfer market because a lot of that aid is not available to these transfers. So now it's even more so expensive and even more difficult to transfer into Vanderbilt on top of the things that you were talking about with the actual academics. So
Yeah.
money and all that. It makes sense why Tim Corbin would not pursue the transfer route on top of recruiting a level of player that's just not there
Yeah.
at
And
99.999% of programs across all sports.
And I'll tell you this, Will. I've heard a lot around the college baseball circles. That 11.7 scholarship limit is gonna be bumped up, and it might be by a lot. So that Vanderbilt, but for Vanderbilt, that's no longer really the advantage that they have over schools. But
I still think all of that was overblown.
I agree. I agree.
You just
I
look at the cost to attend. You can get $40,000 of aid at Vanderbilt annually, and it still doesn't cover, and you're still paying out of pocket compared to that would pay for 2 years of out of state tuition at Mississippi State. So that's the part that I think people just don't think about is, yeah, these guys are getting aid. The school still costs the same. And I would really like to go into this a little more, but I know we have more things we want to hit on.
Yeah, I want to get to Rhett Wiseman, what he quote tweeted. He said in response to Arya's tweets, he quote tweeted and said, "The status quo has been flipped on its head. It's sheer madness in college athletics with the transfer portal. Vandy will go into the transfer portal. No ifs or buts about it. It's a necessity for all teams. Imagine an MLB team not taking part in free agency. Same idea, period." So Rhett had a pretty good point there, and it's not like Corbin. He's gotten transfers before. The idea that Corbin will has never dipped into the transfer market at all is wrong. So like I said, I agree with Rhett. He's going to have to this year. To not to the extent of a Tennessee or a Mississippi State or an LSU does, because they kind of like to feed off of that. But for Vanderbilt, they're going to take a few. They might maybe 3, 4, 5. I'm not putting a number out there, but they're going to enter the transfer portal. Anybody that says they're not at all, that's BS. But they're going to be very selective about it because they have to be. It's Vanderbilt University because they have to. So yes, Will, I agree with you. We will definitely continue this. We'll have plenty of dog days to continue this conversation like we want to. I mean, there's going to be an episode down the road where it ends up being 3 hours and we don't even know about it because we're just rambling about everything. So,
That's very true.
but that's the baseball recap for what it's worth. Will, we forgot to get to the Druw Jones question. Do you want to get to it? We can
I don't
save
have
that for
anything to
another.
add. I know you probably have looked into it.
Let's
I
say
don't have anything to add.
let's
I don't
save
think
it.
he's going to be here. Just what I've read, I'd be shocked. But who knows?
Let's save it because I have a fun answer for it. I'll save that for another episode. Well, let's get to football. There was a football commit. His name is Kelvin
Not a wide
McBride.
receiver. Recruited as a
Yeah,
linebacker.
he
I want
he.
to.
I know. I'm
Well,
getting there. Well, I'm getting there. I listed him on the screen as a wide receiver, but he is going. You're on top of your stuff today, Will. I like it. He is going to be a linebacker at Vanderbilt, and this guy is 6'3", about 200 pounds, and you start seeing some shades of Zach Cunningham there, a guy that's long and obviously is going to grow into his body. So you're seeing the trend of height and length and ranginess on this football team. And not saying it's going to make a whole lot of an impact next season, but year 2, year 3, year 4, you're going to see a pretty damn tall Vanderbilt football team and a very long Vanderbilt football team. So it's going to be interesting, Will, to see how a lot of these recruits pan out and the position. You might see a lot of these kind of position switches. But he's a guy from Mobile, Alabama. Clarkley dipping into Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina. You see him recruiting kind of the radius around Nashville that he talked about. His offer sheet isn't super impressive. Had other offers from Navy, FAU, and Arkansas State. But Will, I mean, you got another commit in the 2023 class. All of a sudden, I saw his 44th overall, starting to kind of inch forward. Of course, that's going to fluctuate a lot because I think
very early.
yeah, the 2022 ratings are still. I think those might be still finishing up a little bit. But Kelvin McBride, what do you think about this kid? And I know you might have a couple other football recruiting notes here to get into. Will.
Yeah, most of his highlight tape was at the receiver position. And
Yeah.
I read, I think it was Robbie, he's always on top of it, put out
Phew.
that they were actually recruiting him as a linebacker, which makes sense when you look at his size right now. He's 6'3", 210. He also plays basketball, which I always like. I think it said in his junior year, he led his school to a 27-6 record in basketball, athletic guy. But obviously, he's going to have to put on weight. I mean, he's a
Mhm.
project. He's another one of these projects. He has the speed of kind of a mid-tier, lower-tier speed receiver, but at linebacker, he's going to be flying. So he's another one of
Yeah.
those long, rangy athletes, Ethan Crisp, they seem to be focusing on. But the main thing that this class is currently missing is beef on either side of the ball,
Yep.
and mainly on that defensive line. And that's what they have visiting. I don't know if you've seen anything about that, Billy, of the guys that will be
I
visiting this
saw a
upcoming and who
guy.
visited this past weekend. And who
I s-
visited this past weekend.
I saw a guy
Those
that
would be some guys.
I saw a guy that's like 6'4", 320 pounds that they were looking at. I'm forgetting his name, but you're right, Will. I've talked about that with a lot of people in this class, and with people that follow Vanderbilt football. that's the thing to watch. You've got to get beefier. You just have to. Offensive line, D line, and I don't think they really did that in the 2022 class. They definitely got longer and more athletic, but you're really gonna have. That's what makes a difference, Will, and that's what Franklin did. He picked out certain guys, like a guy like Adam Butler, where he wasn't huge, but he really put on a lot of weight and developed into a I mean, a pretty damn good size,
I'm
and
very
so, but
glad you brought up that name.
Adam Butler. You like that name, Will?
Yeah. Well, I like that in Butler name because of who I was going to compare him to, or compare one of the guys that was on campus this past weekend, Jaron Woods, out
Oh,
of Texas, 6'4". He's listed at 260. He looks a little bit bigger than that. I think that's an older weight. Or maybe he is just 265. But Texas football, defensive lineman. You look at the guys or the other schools that have offered him. You have Auburn, Baylor, California, Houston. They're listed at the top. And then you can run through the other schools. Texas has offered him, Texas Tech, TCU. And that is the type of guy that they need desperately.
yeah.
Drake Carlson is another one that was there
I
that
was I
actually
was
had a
gonna
crystal
mention him.
ball put to warmer. He's 6'4", 260 out of Father Ryan.
You know
I
what?
mean,
High
he's
school?
another
Yep.
big body. Yep. That's
Father Ryan
why
High.
I
Will, the biggest thing, the most important thing about this class, they could have a guy from your high school, Mount Juliet, and they could have a guy from my high school, Father Ryan. That's pretty damn cool. And Drake Carlson is a guy that I've seen live. He's the real deal. He's a kid that's 6'2", 6'3". Obviously, he can get a lot bigger, and he's going to get bigger. But it's really going to be obviously it's all in the development. But Drake Carlson is another local guy that if Clark Lee is able to get, that's another, I think, little message sent that the mid-state, that's Clark's goal. I mean, if you got to try to hammer down that mid-state. So I love the fact that you mentioned Drake Carlson. I mean, Ethan Crisp and Drake Carlson; those are two guys you could see starting on the defense in a few years for Vanderbilt, right out of the mid-state. And I mean, for Vanderbilt, that's Franklin was able to do that. If Clark is able to do that down the road, it'll be really interesting. Will
Well, that's the
so
main thing when you look at Vanderbilt, that they've produced high level first round picks at or second round picks or high round picks at pretty much every single position. But the main thing or main position group that you look at and say, why have they struggled so badly is defensive line. I mean, even the best guys that they have been more edge rushers, outside linebacker guys that have actually found spots in the NFL. You look at Andre Mintz. I think Stephen Weatherly was on the Vikings there for a little bit. They've
mhm.
had Kyle Westman was bouncing
Yeah,
around for a little bit, but you look at those guys, and that's the best. Every other position, you have an Andre Howell or a DJ Moore, or Earl Bennett or Jordan Matthews or Jay Cutler or Chris Williams, and you can run through the list, and there's a name. There's one guy you can say, that's a star that was developed there. But even 4 stars that Franklin in just never really developed how you wanted them to. They were probably the best defensive linemen as a group that Vanderbilt has had, but that's really where they've always struggled, is at the end of the game, at the end of the day, teams have always been able to just line up and run the ball down Vanderbilt's throat because there's not depth of size and athletes at the defensive line position. And linebackers, as many good ones as they have, and there's a long list of
mhm.
guys that have gone on to the next level. Zach Cunningham on the Titans, Chris Marv, Jonathan Goff. So why in the world can they not find guys like that consistently on the defensive line? I mean, I just named off every significant defensive lineman name, really. I mean, there's a few
Yeah,
more. You got
yeah,
Dio Dangbo most recently,
mhm.
Dario Dangbo, but they're kind of outliers. You can pick them
Yeah,
out when you're able to pick out the guys at an entire position of 3 to 4 guys. That's where they need to be focused on, because they had a lot of people transfer out. Marcus Bradley, Tank Sujic, guys that we thought were going to fill that role. They're gone now. That's a 4 star and a high 3 star. Boom, gone. One of the highest rated players ever in the history of your program, and Marcus Bradley at that position that you've been
gone.
searching for a star. And granted, there were probably some issues, culture fit, whatever it is, but that has to be the focus. And that's who
Mhm.
they had visit this most recent
Yeah,
weekend, because you look at their current commits, granted, those guys usually come off the board a little bit quicker in the skill positions, but they had those guys visit. They have none right now in the current class on either side of the ball, offensive or defensive lines. So that'll be a focus, and we'll be staying updated over the summer on that.
yeah, and Will, and one more thing before we get to a little bit of basketball, it's going to be really interesting to see how many of these young guys see playing time early. Right off the top of my head, I see Trudell Berry seeing a lot of time early. I see Davion Walker, the receiver, seeing some time early. Heck, maybe even Darren Agu on the D line, because point blank, they're going to have to. I mean, these guys are going to have to play, and that's another thing to watch. How early do we see these guys? So it'll be fun. Well, that's another thing we're going to be tracking. I'd love to do kind of a freshman ranking, like our own freshman rankings coming in. Maybe that's another project we could do. But Will, lastly here, I know you got to get to your Celtics. Has the game started yet?
Yes, it has. Celtics are up ten
Okay.
to four right now, so
Celtics
I'm
up ten
keeping
to
an eye
four.
on it. That's why I'm like
Maybe,
spacing out a little bit.
yeah.
If you haven't
Maybe
noticed,
should we just keep recording so you can have that good mojo going?
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little basketball before we get out of here. The new hoops faces are on campus. Noah Shelby, Lee Dort, Colin Smith, Malik Dia. I'm forgetting the other guys' names. So of course, they got a couple other freshmen that came in. Of course, the transfer Ezra Mannion came in. Paul Lewis, of course, is another guy. A lot of new faces. Feels like we're saying that every year for Stackhouse, and not saying it's a bad thing, but that's kind of his style, where he's going to dip into the transfer market. He's going to have to dip into the
Well,
transfer market
is it
because
his style? Do we really know what his style
I mean,
is?
I don't know if we know what his style is,
He went
but
through a ground basement all the way down underneath the basement rebuild. So we don't even know. He's right now we're seeing his first. This is really his first team. Like this is what we are about to see this upcoming year is what I would describe as like team one for Stackhouse. Like this is really the first time he's not in some chaotic bubble of COVID, first off, which has been basically almost his entire tenure of being a head coach has been within COVID and the weird restrictions that you have on all sorts of recruiting and traveling and AAU circuits, which is where his connections are. That's why when you're going to see why the hell they hired Jerry Stackhouse from the NBA G League is the amount of connections I believe that he has around the recruiting circuit and within into the next level. So we're just now seeing what it's going to look like having Jerry Stackhouse as a head coach. And so that's the part of this season and why I've been so lenient evaluating him. That will end. And it was great to see all of them. And the one guy I wanted to point out is Trey Thomas. Is Trey Thomas? He had a couple of earrings and he went from the "Where's my hug at" looking guy. That's what he started out looking at. Dude looked like he was ready to pull up
he
and
look
drop a lot of
he looks a
threes
little
this
bit
season. I
he
liked
looks a
it.
little bit bigger too. But
Hey,
those biceps look a little bit
Hey,
bigger
as
on Trey
much as
Thomas.
I was off the Trey Thomas train last season, I can
Are
tell
you
you one
already
thing.
back on the Trey
No, no,
Thomas
no.
train?
I've been off the Trey Thomas train the entirety because I thought he needed time to develop and put on size and not be. I am. This is the year I wanted Trey Thomas put into the rotation. He will fit
It's gonna be
this
fun
team.
to see him with Noah Shelby, another,
He will
kind of guy
fit
that.
this team. Like that's how I feel is he will accent the team way better than what he brought to the floor the last couple of years. So
And
that this
let's be
season is a
honest,
big season for him.
he's not gonna have to play a whole lot of defense either. And he's not gonna have to play
Gonna
as
have rim
as many minutes
protectors.
as he's gonna have some rim protectors back there with big old Liam Robbins and Lee Dort, the Liam and Lee. How about that? The
Mhm.
Liam and Lee show. So, Will, I want to ask a question here before we get out of here, though. Early expectations for the young guys. Let's not go season, but Noah Shelby, Lee Dort, Colin Smith. For me, Noah Shelby, I'm really interested to see what his role is, because he's a guy that can light up the scoreboard. He's a guy that can put a few threes on you in an instant, especially from watching his highlights. Colin Smith, another guy, is he kind of the next second coming of Dylan Dessou? I think he is more. It looks better at this age than Dylan Dessou did. I mean, his body
Colin
type.
Smith is my guy of this class. That is the one. That's the one I have the highest expectations to make an immediate impact. And usually you look at guards and say that they're going to make the quickest impact, and the transition's usually easier, but usually not point guards. And so I think Noah Shelby is going to play off the ball a little bit more than he's used to, and I think that may take him some time to get used to. And then Lee Dort has a lot of depth in front of him, a little bit more depth at that position, and may
Liam
need
and Q.
a little bit more time to develop. So Colin Smith fits into what they need right now. And I've watched a lot, pretty much everything that these guys have out. And Colin Smith he's not Dylan Dessou. He's a guard. Like he's a small forward, NBA style small forward. I would describe Dylan Dessou as a four, and Colin Smith is definitely a three. So he will be kind of playing the role of I think he could be a guy that could be close to leading the team in scoring as a freshman. And he has the potential to do that. And I could be completely wrong and he could not be ready, but everything that I've seen, physically, he's the most ready. Size wise, full game that is going to not have the holes in the game. That's what gets exposed at the next level. It's not what you have that you do so well, and that Noah Shelby's a good shooter and Lee Dort crashes to the basket, rolls really well, and is an athlete. But when you play at the next level in college, is it exposes the one or two or three things that you don't do well. Is Trey Thomas can't play on the ball defense without fouling, and he gets bullied. That gets exposed immediately. Or Liam Robbins is a little slow-footed, exposed immediately. QMB the same way, a little can't get off the ground, that's exposed and it's targeted. That doesn't happen in college because you're just, or high school, because you're just better than everyone else.
Yep.
And so I think Colin Smith, when you watch him play, is the most complete game without holes. I don't think that he does one thing better than anyone else in the class or even on the team. But I think everything combined and a few of the moves that he has and the athleticism
Oh
he
yeah.
has, he's going to be a guy that I think can step out there and average, double-digit points
Yeah.
off the rip as a freshman.
I agree off the rip. I think Colin Smith has the most potential right away. Right away, seeing the floor. I think he has the most potential. But I'm also interested to see where's Lee Dort at in his development. His freshman year. How much development does he need? How much bulking up does he need? How much getting in shape does he need? I'm really interested to see that. Now, for all these guys, I am. How college ready are they? But for Lee Dort, you look at a post player like him. That's what you look at in a post player. What's his shape like? What does he look like running up and down the floor, and also his touch around the basket? So it's going to be fun. Well, I think for the first
Well, I'm
time,
curious to see if he primarily plays the five or if he can also shift over into that four spot. That's what I
yeah,
don't know
that'll
about
be another
Dort. I don't know
interesting
if he's
thing.
stuck behind, because if he's stuck behind Liam Robbins
Might be
and
tough.
QMB, and even if they want to play two bigs, I mean, Liam Robbins fully healthy, if he can maintain staying healthy, God forbid. I don't even want to start talking about injuries.
You
But if
just jinxed it.
but
You
if
literally just
I'm
jinxed
there's
it.
no
Oh
jinxing
my!
it, man. Like, we've done everything. We've talked about it. We've not talked about it.
I thought the
We've
ghost was
acted like they
gone,
weren't
man.
happening. We've acted like knees don't exist, and they still get hurt. Like, somebody's getting hurt. Like,
Who's
it
your
doesn't matter.
prediction? Who's your
Whatever.
prediction for getting hurt this year? Should we put
My
those out?
prediction is a combination of Liam Robbins, and then I think that
QMB.
one of I don't think QMB will have injury issues because he's not an explosive athlete, and that's where you see him. I
That's where
think
he
it's
gets
gonna
lucky
be. I
then.
think it'll be Dort or Shelby coming off that foot thing will have
Yeah,
something, because they both. I know that Shelby had foot surgeries in a boot.
yeah.
But he should be good to go. Everybody should be good to go, but inevitably somebody's going to have an injury come up, and that's just, you just know it's going to happen.
Inevitably, I think definitely one of the freshmen is going to get hurt. Like that's a guarantee with Vanderbilt basketball. I hate saying it,
The
but
curse of
I think
Bryce Drew
I
/
think
Kevin Stalling / whatever.
the ghost is still there. And I hate being so negative. Well, usually we're the sunshine pumpers here, but I mean this we're just stating facts here. So we might put kind of an over under on how many injuries this year, and
How
then
many
predict.
games missed by how many starters games
Oh
missed?
man.
Like,
Oh man,
that would
I
be
mean
pretty good.
it's something to look at. It really is because it happens every year. I mean, how many years is it back to back now? We've got
Since
it
Garland,
started with
2016,
Garland,
17.
and then the next year was it Neesmith? That next year
Neesmith, yes, the next year
it
he had
was
the foot
Neesmith the next
fracture,
year,
the foot stress fracture that caused him to miss.
and then the year after that, who was it? It was somebody. Somebody got
That
hurt.
was the year.
Well,
That was
Liam
18.
Robbins was it? No, Liam
That
Robbins
was
wasn't here yet. That
2018.
was yeah. I
I don't
mean,
know, man.
ever since
I gotta look back
Darius
at the years. I'm
Garland.
getting all the disappointing players or disappointing injuries mixed up in my head, all the heartbreak mixed up. All I know is I was there, and I'll never forget. I will never forget the play Darius Garland got hurt on. Like, I immediately knew it before anyone else even realized he was hurt. I saw him go down. I saw him get up and look at his knee, and I was like, he just tore something. Like, immediately.
You
And I
knew
will
it.
never
You knew
forget
it.
having that thought. And the pessimist in me was unfortunately right. And from then on, I think that broke me just as much as the 2014 Temple game broke me. That broke me initially. And then Darius Garland broke me. And then any ounce of anything that I had left was broken during the ETSU game. And so now I'm just ready to go. I'm
And
just ready
then
for the season. I'm ready to discuss it. if it blows up in our faces, it blows up in our faces. But let's ride, Billy. I'm ready to
Let's
go for
ride.
the dog days.
The fact that they went 0-18 that year, I mean, that was just salt in the wound. That was kind of
Yeah.
the icing on top of that cake. But the dog days have begun on the Door Report, and we're going to continue rolling on. Probably once a week here for the next 2 months. But if there's more to talk about, we might go 2 days a week here. But Will, the dog days are here, and I'm ready. I'm ready to roll as well. Let's go watch the Celtics. What do you say?
Yeah, I've got to see the
What's the
scoreboard.
score
I'm ready.
update?
I'm ready to. I haven't really, honestly. I've been in and out. Like I've had to like focus in and just not look up, so I don't even know what's going on
That's
right
tough.
now.
That's
Because
tough.
otherwise, I just get completely lost in whatever was going on, and I'm going to sound even dumber than normal. So I don't really have much of that to spare. So
It'll
there we
be,
go. As my
man.
vocabulary is finally going out, and I'm beginning to stutter as well.
There it is. There you have it. The dog days have begun on the Door Report, episode 165. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next